Hey, my friends. Mary Rose here. Here, let me get a little bit more of me on the screen. There we go. A little more of me here. Hey, it's Wednesday. It's 1 p.m. Pacific. We've gathered to talk about story structure and writing craft. I'm your host, Mary Rose Wood. I'm an author, and this is just my great pleasure to show up and spread a little mentor energy around to those of you. And I know you're out there. My usual gang is out there. It's so nice to see some of you guys here. You're called to write. You're storytellers. You're part of an ancient tradition. I salute you, and I want you to pat yourselves on the back. I want you to feel a little special. I want you to throw a little glitter and rose petals on yourself, because telling stories is part of what makes us human. It's one of humanity's ancient practices for giving our lives meaning, to try to understand and document and share this ongoing deep stirring of the existential pot about what gives our lives meaning, what connects us to each other. This is really important work. I'm going to wave to Chris. Nice to see you, Chris. Cynthia, delighted to see you here. I see there's a bunch of others here as well. Today, we're going to talk about revision. And it is a big topic. It is one is tempted to say the biggest topic. There's a saying, I'm sure you've all heard it, that there is no writing, there's only rewriting. Now, I have heard this said, and it's true. We're going to talk about why it's true today. But I was curious who said it first. And there's a couple of different people who are given credit for it. So let's just take it as timeless wisdom. Let's take it as a proverb. Let's take it as something that requires no source. It's just true. There's no good writing. There's only good rewriting. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So it's stay tuned for this, because there's a lot of misconceptions about revision, and I want to debunk probably the four biggest misconceptions about what revision is, and then I'm going to take you on a little journey through what revision really is. So some writers love revision, some writers hate revision. I would love to know what kind of writer you are. You can leave it in the comments. I have to confess that I am in the camp of writers who love revision. I love revision. And I want to tell you why. The vast majority of the time that we spend in relationship to our writing, we are grappling with the fact that it's not good. It's not, and when I say not good, I mean that if we allow ourselves to judge it according to the standard of what a finished piece of art, a finished piece of literature should look like, the work before us does not rise to that standard because it's not finished. Most of the time, I want to say, 99% of the time, maybe 98% of the time that we spend with our work, it's not ready for prime time. It's not good enough to be given to the reader. Now, that may sound harsh, but it's just logic. If we're still working on it, it's not finished. If it were finished, we would be done with it, and we would have given it to our readers through whatever channel we use to get to our readers, and we would have started something new. We never truly get the pleasure of the reader. We're the writer. We get the experience of wrestling with the wild, messy beast of our book, and we wrestle with it, and we fix it, and we deal with its imperfections, and we tweak it, and we cut it, and we're in battle with it. We're doing battle with it up until it's good, up until it's working, up until it's ready to hand off to the reader, its ultimate destination, and then it's theirs. So the minute that it's a pleasure to be with, we give it away and we start something new. And what we start is now going to be, it doesn't start from the level of completion that we just did. It starts from square one all over again. We're back at the beginning. We're back not knowing. We're back writing rough, messy drafts, right? So we as writers are always in the realm of grappling with a very imperfect manuscript. And the reward that we get is kind of backloaded at the very end of the process of revision, where we finally start to see the puzzle pieces falling into place bit by bit as we revise, as we do our job to make it not just finished in a quantitative sense, but ready for the reader in a qualitative sense. As we polish each sentence and tuck it into place, as we put the right words in the right order, as they say, as we take out everything that's extraneous, and it's like we're staging the house for sale, like we're decluttering, we're polishing, we're dusting, we're making everything look its best. I don't know if anyone here has ever been through that process of moving. Like, you fix up the house, right, in order to sell it. You clean it up, you fix all the broken things. And who hasn't had that observation of like, oh, why didn't we have it this nice while we were living in it, right? Like we made it this nice in order for others to see its value. That's what we do with our work. We get to the end and we finally make it all work. We get it all shipshape. We get it all polished up. But then as soon as we do, it's ready for its new owners. It's not for us at that point. As soon as it's ready for the reader, we give it to the reader. And then we start over with another fixer-upper. That's a mess, right? And that's leaky, and we've got to do all the work. So that's why I love revising. It's just that part of the job where we get to say, hey, that's kind of good. I like the way that sounds. We get to start enjoying a little bit the hard work that we've done. We start to see the fruits of our labor. All right. Now, I feel that way about revising because I have been doing this for a while, and I have a pretty solid writing craft. I have a lot of ideas about story structure that I not only teach, but I practice. I'm a practitioner, and I put this stuff to work in my own writing and my own revising, and I've been doing that for a while. So when I get to revision, I'm in a comfort zone. I have a technique. I have a framework. I have a pretty solid list of things to do. I know what to do to make everything shipshape. And so it's a pure pleasure to me when I get to that point. Now, if you're not at that point, and probably most of you aren't, you may not love revision. You may find revision a little daunting, and that's totally understandable. So that's really what I want to talk about today. Not every writer has yet acquired a realistic idea of what it means to revise, to truly revise a book. What does effective revision look like? We don't, as I have observed in previous live streams, we don't, when we're leveling up, when we're learning, typically get to inhabit the brain of an experienced, skillful writer and watch the process of them going word by word through a draft and revising it. When it's our turn to do it, we've never really seen anyone else do it. So who can blame us for not being crystal clear on what that process is? So don't beat yourselves up. You don't know what you don't know. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why you're here. That's why you're watching this video. You want to learn something. You want to get a different take on revision and maybe learn something. Okay. But if you don't like revision, let's look at some of these misconceptions about what revision is. And then I want to give you a sense of what it's supposed to be like. I welcome, as always, any questions that you guys have in the comments, and we'll try to answer them all before we finish today. Okay, so let's dive in to the misconceptions about revision. And I see this, I see it in my observing of the writing community, my observation of people who are online, whether they're hanging out in Facebook groups or going to conferences, attending panels, asking questions. whether it's students that I've worked with over my many years teaching, I see these misconceptions, right? So just this is from observation, close observation of the developing writer. The first misconception about revision is that it is not proofreading. Revision is not proofreading. Now, I imagine some of you know this, that this is a particularly naive misconception, but who can blame someone for thinking this, right? This is what we learn in school, that you write something and then you check it. Did you check your work? Did you check your work? When I say proofreading, I mean the writer who thinks that, okay, I wrote it, it's done, I got to the end, and now I have to go back and look for mistakes. I'm checking for mistakes. That's what I mean by the proofreading misconception. Those writers are just checking their work. They're looking for typos. They're looking for grammatical errors, punctuation errors, right? They're looking for a very technical English class level of corrections yet to be made. That's not what revision is. Is proofreading necessary? Of course it is. And it will be necessary when the book is done, when the book is revised. Someone's going to want to check for typos, misspellings, grammatical flubs, punctuation errors. Someone's going to do that at the end. Maybe your book will be published by a publisher and they will have a copy editor assigned to proofread it. Maybe you're going to be independently publishing and you will find a mechanism to have it proofread. It's not that proofreading is bad. It's just that we're not there yet. We're not there yet. When you've got a draft and you're ready to start revising, proofreading is the last thing on your mind. Okay. So that's one misconception. Here's another one. And I think that Jaren has already left a comment that speaks very closely to this one. I'm going to show Jaren's comment so that you can see that we are all aligned here. Jaren has shared in the comments, sometimes I'm led to believe that revision means redefining my original vision for the story. All right. So here's the misconception about, second misconception about revision. Revision is not another round of drafting. Now, if you don't have a clear idea of what revision is, but you've internalized this advice that, I finished a draft and now I must revise it, but you don't really know how to approach revision, obviously you're going to go back to the beginning and you're still in a drafting mindset because that's basically what you know how to do. And what you may do, and I've seen this many times, is you may approach your revision as if it's just another draft. And you might say, well, I have a different idea for that now. And so I'll just sort of write a new version of the book that incorporates some of these different ideas. And what you've done is you've just written another first draft of a related book or a similar book or a book about the same main character. I see this happen a lot, that instead of engaging in the true process of revision, a writer who doesn't really know how to revise is trying to be diligent about continuing to work on the book. And so they just keep drafting. They keep changing things. They're not making them better. They're just making them different. They don't really have a strategy. The revision is not being controlled by a plan. They don't have a framework. They don't have a lot of technique, but they know how to draft and they like to sit and write and they know the book needs more work, but it doesn't go further than that. There's not a more well-defined process than that. And so they just keep drafting. These are the writers who will often say, oh, I've been working on this book for 8 years, 10 years, which, makes me, it makes my heart hurt a little bit. And I say, what have you been doing for 10 years? It's like, well, I just keep rewriting it. I just keep working on it. I just keep, keep thinking of new things. I have new ideas. I keep adding them in. And, it's daunting to imagine the amount of work that gets put in, but you see that that is just a kind of a flat process. That's just kind of running around the same track over and over and over again. They're doing laps around their book, right? Uh, and it's because they still feel, and they are probably correct, it's not done yet. It doesn't feel done. And so they keep working on it, but they're not really revising. They're just writing draft after draft after draft. If that rings a bell with anyone, I'm not throwing shade on you, okay? I'm not, it's not a criticism. What else could you do? You're doing what you know how to do. You're being diligent. You don't want to give up on your book until it works. I get it. All right. But writing a billion drafts without a strategy is not the answer, okay? Um, Also, one of the things that I feel motivates writers to keep in drafting mode when they really need to be in revising mode is that they do sense that something's missing. The book is not there yet. It's not good enough yet. It's not engaging enough yet. It feels like it needs to be better. And it's a very normal human impulse that when we feel that something's missing, we feel that the solution must be to add. And so we try to solve problems in our writing by adding. We get stuck in this additive mentality. Now, I'm going to talk about the right way to approach revision in a couple minutes, but just know that the process of revision is far more likely to be a subtractive process than an additive process. So think about that a little bit. Let me give you a third misconception about revision, and this is a big one. Revision is not primarily about the words. Now, I know that this is very shocking because you're writers and you have drafts, and the drafts are 50,000 words, 60,000 words, 70,000 words. You're proud of having written all the words. You've made a book length manuscript. It's got a lot of words in it. And when you go to revise, what are you revising? You look at what you've done and it's words. It's just an enormous collection of words that you've created. And you are rightly proud of doing all that work. You got all those words down. That's fantastic. But when you go to revise, if you focus on the words, you are not really revising. And I see this very, very frequently. And it is the writer who goes to revise thinking like, okay, well, revision means to really elevate the language, right? To really take those sentences that I wrote in the haste of drafting and make each one like a beautiful gem, add the fancy language and really get those descriptions all juicy and full of poetic imagery and make the descriptions really vivid and just keep describing and adding and describing. Oh no. You see what we've done here. We've slipped back into an additive framework, right? And the writer who thinks, okay, I drafted it, so now the draft is done. Now my job is to go back and make each sentence like a cupcake. Nobody wants to eat 70,000 cupcakes for dinner. That's a very rich offering, right? It's too much, too many cupcakes. And so it's fun if you love language as I do, and as I imagine many of you do. It is I'm just looking at one of the comments here that revision is strategic. Amazing. Yes, we're going to talk about what that strategy is. It's very intentional and it does have a plan. But back to my cupcake idea. Our job as writers is not to force feed our readers cupcakes. Okay. And if you love language, as I do, and as I know many of you do, I'm sure probably most of you really love language, you love beautiful writing, you love a sentence that just has that like sass, that punch, that rhythm, right? That swing. As we say in jazz, it has that swing. We just love it. And I love that too. And there's definitely a place for that in the revision process, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But that is not the main point of revision. That's not where we begin our revision. And here's my point, and why I call this a misconception, even though there is a grain of truth in it. We are going to address the words in revision, but you cannot know which words are the right words for your book, which are the right words in the right order, unless you have done the work to have crystal clear clarity. It's a bit of a redundancy right there about what story those words are conveying, because the words are the materials. They are the means of conveyance for the story and characters that you have imagined, that you are now trying to put in your reader's mind vividly, so that it engages their emotions, that it seizes their imaginations, grabs their attention, so that they have to keep turning the pages to find out what happens next. So unless you've got the clarity about the storytelling that a true revision must focus on, you're not yet prepared to even make judgments about which words are the best words. So the fourth misconception about revision is this: revision is not something you do by ear. That's actually, I did a double negative there. The misconception is that revision is something you can do by ear, and that you do by ear. But revision is not something you can do by ear. Let me just clarify what I mean when I say by ear. When we are drafting, we are to some extent going by ear, right? We're in a kind of an inventive, creative flow. We're imagining things, we're putting them down. And hopefully, if we have a disciplined process while we're drafting, we're not too preoccupied with how we're expressing the stuff. We're trying to generate material, right? So we're sort of writing by ear. There's a quality of it being, a little unpremeditated. And when we go to revise, we have, if we don't have a different way of working than by ear, we hit an obstacle, right? Because we go back to revise. We go back to the beginning. We say, okay, now I just finished drafting. Now I'm in revision mode. And we're still using the same ear that we used to write the draft with. We haven't swapped out our drafting ears to a more discerning set of ears. We haven't got a different pair of ears sitting in the drawer waiting for us to put them on, right? It's the same ear. Now there's this saying, of course, I'm sure you've heard it, that what got you here won't get you there. So the odds of the same kind of unschooled or kind of unconscious or automatic ear of how you write, how you put sentences on the page, what sounds good to you, that is a perfectly appropriate thing to rely upon while you're drafting. It's not going to help you revise because it already sounds good to you. The draft is written according to your ear. And if your ear is all you have to go by, when you go back to draft, you're asking the same ear that wrote the sentence, is that any good? Does that sound good or not? If you find yourself revising by asking yourself, does that sound good? It's a bit of a red flag. It's a bit of a red flag. That should not be the only question you're asking yourself when you're revising. If that's what's going on, then you are revising by ear, and that is a misconception. It's not going to help you. All right. Now, does your ear play a role in revision? Yes, it does. And I'm going to talk about that. Okay. But these are the misconceptions. All right. And let me just go over them quickly. Revision is not proofreading. Revision is not yet another round of drafting. Revision is not primarily about the words, although the words are part of it. And lastly, revision is not something that you can do by ear. And let me just add another observation to that before I go into what revision might actually look like to a writer with a higher level of craft. It's often said, and I know you've all heard this, that writers have no objectivity about their own work. And that this is why we need to get notes from other people. This is why we need to have, editors, and this is why we need critique partners. This is why we need to, submit our work to other eyes, get notes, send it to agents, and hope and pray they'll tell us how to fix it, right? It puts writers in a kind of a one down position in a sense, because we are told on the one hand, like, you're the creator, it's your book, you're drafting the book. But then we're also told that, yes, but you have no objectivity about your own work. You won't be able to see what's wrong with your own work. So therefore, at a certain point, you become the least expert person in the room, and you become very vulnerable to other people's opinions, feedback, and notes about your work. Writers can lack objectivity about their work if they write by ear. That's what that means. If your ear is all you're relying upon, or mostly what you're relying upon, you have no objectivity about your work, because what sounds good to you is what sounds good to you. Is it the best for the reader? Well, maybe not. Where you developed your ear, how you developed your ear, that's different for everyone. The answer to that question. But the truth is that your ear is not necessarily a great guide to what's going to work best for the reader. So now that I've mentioned the whole point of this exercise, the reader, let's start to talk now about revision and what it really is. What it really is. Revision is like, it's a different hat. You have your drafting hat and you have your revising hat. It is a totally different process. I sometimes use the image of the difference between a rehearsal and a performance. And those of you who maybe play a musical instrument or have been part of any kind of performing arts activity, you know what I'm talking about. When we practice, when we're rehearsing, we are experimenting. We're figuring it out. We're exploring possibilities. We're creating possibilities. We're improvising. It's a very messy process, and it is messy in the best possible sense of that word. It's not like making a mess, and that's a naughty thing. It's the creative mess. It's the mess of a painter's studio splattered with paint. It's the mess of throwing clay on the wheel. It's that kind of mess. It is the essential mess of the creative process. It's what we must embrace to do good work. We have to be able to free ourselves from trying to be tidy while we make something. If you don't want to mess up your kitchen, you're never going to bake a loaf of bread. Like, you have to be able to mess up the kitchen. You're going to clean it up later. That's fine. But you have to be able to know the difference between being in this generative, open-ended, embrace the mess state of drafting and what will happen later when it's time to clean the kitchen. All right? Many writers think that writing is writing and it's just all kind of the same. But I'm here to tell you that the drafting process and the revision process are very, very different. You need to approach revision with a different mindset. the point of drafting is quite personal. When we're drafting, we're pretty self-absorbed, and we should be, because we're trying to draw ideas from within ourselves. And those ideas, the best ones, are going to have some personal quality. They're going to draw from emotional truth. They're going to draw from our own personal life experience. If not literally, then psychologically, emotionally, we can't help but write about life the way we see life, the way we understand life. We can't help but fill our characters with a sense of consciousness, the breath of life, if you will, that is in some way derived from what we experience being conscious, right? And so there's something personal about it. And it's okay when you're drafting to stay in this, gazing at your navel a little bit, in the freedom of play, generating material, not worrying about outcomes or final products, letting yourself invent and invent and invent. Just be generative. When we get to revision, that is when we are taking all of this great stuff we've created and we start to say, okay, it's time for the reader. This isn't about me. All of this stuff came from me. I drew it from myself. I drew it from my imagination, from my heart, from my intellect, from my experience. And now I've got all this material, but it's not for me. It's for the reader. So you see what I mean by putting on quite a different hat. It's quite a different lens to look through. Now we have to shape the materials that we have created into a book or a narrative. If you're writing a story or a graphic novel or something that doesn't quite feel like a book, screenplay, right? Or stage play. We have to shape our materials into a narrative that's designed to work for the reader, for the reader. So now it's not about us anymore. I guess you could say that it does require a certain amount of empathy, because now we have to be able to imagine ourselves into the experience of someone not us. Someone who doesn't know all the things we know, someone who hasn't spent a year staring at this manuscript, somebody who's going to come to it for the first time and who's going to experience it for the first time, starting at the beginning, proceeding in a linear fashion from left to right on each page, from top to bottom on each page, then turning the page and making their way to the end. They only know what we tell them in the order that we offer it. So they have a completely different experience of the book than we do. And in revision, our job is to imagine ourselves into that experience and now apply technique. All right. Now, here's what I want to offer you in terms of how to truly approach this kind of revision. I've got 5 points. So I'm going to get through 5 points. So stick with me. First point of revision: fix the story first. I cannot emphasize this enough. Now, when we have been generating material and we're in a nice messy mode, we may have a lot of stuff and it may be shaped like a book, or it may not really be shaped like a book yet. If we have some training and understanding and conscious practice of story structure, the material that we generate, even in our drafting phase, may have the rough shape of a book already. And I cannot emphasize enough what a huge time saver this is. Now, it's possible to take a lot of material and then approach it and say, okay, how do I shape this into a story? It's possible. But if you haven't if you haven't been generating material with even enough awareness of what the necessary ingredients of a story are, you may not have generated all the parts that you need to build a complete story. I hope that makes sense. If you've been generating scenes that actually are part of a story structure, if you know that you've needed to give your hero a substantial set of obstacles to set them on a journey of transformation, if you know that your hero is supposed to have a mission and be in pursuit of something really clear, right? If you know that on the way to that mission that they are going to be beset with forces of adversity, things are going to get in the way. At every step of the journey, there's going to be a new obstacle to overcome. So if you think that way about story, if you have enough grasp of story structure to know that you're going to look at your materials, and you're going to say, okay, good. Okay, there's the mission, there's the obstacles. Like maybe I need to put these in a different order, and maybe, but you'll have most of the pieces that you need. If you are just generating material without thinking about story structure at all, you may have a lot of work ahead of you. Okay. So when I say fix the story first, I cannot predict how much fixing your story is going to need. But let's assume, let's hope that you've been writing through the drafting process with this kind of overarching concept of what you're building. You're building a story, right? You've got some story structure. So what is it that you're going to fix when I say fix the story first? You're going to fix the story on several different levels. You're going to look at it over on the level of the book as a whole. All right. And what I mean by that is, do you have that clearly defined main character on a journey of transformation? Is your narrative divided pretty clearly into 3 acts, in which we have a beginning, middle, and end? The beginning establishing your hero, who they are, in a way that makes the reader understand, oh, I know exactly what Bilbo Baggins needs to have happen. This poor guy, he needs an adventure in the worst way. Oh, boom, look, and here comes his adventure, right? If you know to set up your first act to create that expectation of what kind of journey of transformation your hero needs to go on, and then you set up your second act to deliver that exact journey of transformation, which is difficult, and it's going to take up at least half of the book, and is going to include lots and lots and lots of obstacles that are going to force your hero to keep learning and growing and changing and turning into someone quite different by the end. And if you have a sense of what a third act is, that this is where all of the transformation that your heroes have been through kind of comes home to roost. It gets tested. The reader gets to see it on display. We get to see, like, did this journey of transformation happen or not? Is it irrevocable or not? Has the world been changed as a result of our hero's growth? All of the things that we talk about when we talk about a third act. So that's the level of the book. You got to check to see if you've ticked off those main structural points, right? Then you need to look at each act, and you need to dig a little more deeply into how each of those acts is outfitted with story energy. Do we know enough about who your hero is at the beginning? Do we know enough about the rules of their world to understand why they are the way they are, why they've been, in a sense, stuck in the state of being up until the moment that this particular story starts, and how this specific adventure that's offered to them in the first act is, it hits the bullseye of what they need. It's not an adventure that is randomly looking for someone to go on it. It is exactly the adventure that this particular character needs in order to learn what they've got to learn. All right. So that's looking at the first act to see if you've really fulfilled the obligations of the first act. Looking at the second act, I'm not going to do a whole deep dive into each act now. There are other videos on the channel that you can look at that does go into more detail about the different acts. But looking at each act to see whether it's delivering the goods of storytelling is part of what you must do in revision. So you're looking at the book as a whole, then you're looking at each act, and we don't end there. And this is really, really important. You must look at each scene in your draft, and you must ask that same question. Now, any of my Path of the Storyteller students know that my favorite saying when we look at a scene together and we want to evaluate it, where's the storytelling? You must look at each scene and determine for yourself whether it's delivering the goods in terms of storytelling. What's happening in this scene? What part of the hero's journey is happening in this particular scene? If you don't have a ready and clear answer to that question, you need to stop, because your job right now in revision is to fix the story first. And if the storytelling in a scene is so subtle that it's not really there, right? Then maybe that scene needs more work in order to lift the storytelling up. Maybe that scene just needs to be cut. Maybe it's not necessary. You've got to look at what you've written and understand what's being accomplished there. Now, I am going to add one more detail into this notion of fixing the story first, and that is to check the pace. Because once you're looking at the arc of the book as a whole and you're looking at the 3 acts, you have some benchmarks that you can use to check whether the thing has the right pace. And the first act, which is where your hero's ordinary world is exposed, the adventure, the mission that they're going to go on is presented, and hopefully there's some exploration of the wonderful energy of resistance, which we talked about a lot last live stream, something that writers have to grapple with within ourselves, but our heroes have to grapple with it too. That resistance exposes so much about the hero's psychology, so it's really wise to include it. It's truthful. It's psychologically truthful to include it in your storytelling. You have to get through all of that in the first act, and can you do that quickly? 20% of the full length of the book, perhaps? That would be a good benchmark to try to hit. You can be quicker. You can be quicker. But you don't want to spend more than 20%, 20 to 25% max getting through that stuff, because that's too slow for the reader. That's who we're doing it for. So make sure that you're doing all the things as you fix the story, but you're doing them while hitting certain benchmarks of pace. The second act will be at least half the full length of the book, maybe a little more. And then the third act will be of a similar length to the first act, 20 to 25%. I strongly recommend planning an important midpoint scene in the second act. So that's kind of the dead center of the book. And if you think about those benchmarks, you can see that the idea of not having objectivity about your book and writing by ear and all that stuff, you're not helpless about any of this stuff anymore, right? Like, you can say, no, I'm taking 40% of the length of my book to get my hero on the adventure. It's too much. I'm going to apply my technique. I'm going to cut this first act in half. I'm going to be ruthless about establishing what's necessary and what's not. Maybe I've got a lot of second act type scenes hanging around in the first act. You can start to talk like a pro about your work. You can start to be a little strategic and analytical if you start to think about those benchmarks. So part of fixing the story first is to check your pace. You have to have 3 acts in the right proportion, and look at what happens in the dead center of the book. That midpoint scene is it's like the pole that holds up a tent. It's a great opportunity to re-engage your reader. Okay. So job 1 of revision is to fix the story first. All right. Job 2 of revision is to put that story where the reader can see it. What do I mean by that? You would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be, by the experiences of writers who have a draft and they know what the story is. They actually have done the work. They've thought it through. They know their character really well. And it's all in there. It's all kind of in there. But they make the reader hunt and peck for it. They make the reader go looking for it. You know, it's buried under excess. It's in the wrong order. This happens a lot, and it's understandable, right? Because we have read the book a million times. We say something on page 50 that the reader needs to know on page 30, and we forget that we haven't said it yet. It's, you know, this is human. But that's why revision requires that different hat. We've got to be disciplined. So put the story where the reader can see it. Put it out front where the reader can see it. Give it to them as they need to know it. And don't bury it in throwaway asides or the last lines of scenes, or don't fill your pages with extra material. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute. That is like conceals like a layer of fog over the story. You've got a story, flaunt it, put it where the reader can see it. You should be using every technique at your disposal to shine a spotlight on the storytelling every chance you can. All right. Now, putting the story where the reader can see it is essential, because what good is a story if the reader doesn't notice it? All right. It's like a too cluttered house, right? You have a valuable piece of artwork in the corner, but it's got a blanket over it and the cat box is in front of it. Like, you want to see my Picasso, put it where people can see it. All right. So the corollary to that is you have to get rid of everything that's not story. You have to get rid of things that are not story. This is such an important part of revision. Now, notice the order in which I'm giving you these tips. You've got to fix the story first so that you know what the story is. It's only when you know what it is that you know what is not story. When you know what it is and you identify the scenes that are not really telling any story, you get rid of those scenes that are not story, okay? And you also get rid of, oh, this is so common, my friends, you get rid of that first page or page and a half or sometimes 2 pages of every scene that is just kind of like the intro. And then the story that's being told in that scene starts on the 3rd page of it. Like, we don't need that first page. We don't need the intro. Every scene does not need a long warm-up. We don't need an opening act for each beat of storytelling. Just tell story. If anybody was around or wants to watch the replay of the video that I did about the Alec Baldwin rule, always tell story. That's what I'm talking about here. You don't have to warm it up first. We're in the book. We want to go from beat of story to beat of story. That's the reader's experience, and that's what we're trying to curate right now. Trying to give the reader a great experience. All right. So fix the story first. Put the story where the reader can see it, and get rid of all that is not story. Notice what I'm talking about. Story, story, and story. My first 3 tips for revising are all about the story. Now, we've got that under our belts. I hope the lesson has been learned. The first thing you're going to fix is the storytelling. Now, I'm going to talk about the language. All right. Once you've got your storytelling set, by all means, put on your poet hat, right? And now we're going to look at the language. But our goal is not to add like pretty words, because we are now in a subtractive mode. We are not in additive mode. We are trying to get rid of anything that interferes with the storytelling. All right. Now, what we want to do is we want to deliver that story vividly into the reader's head. And it is on the basis of that goal that we make our decisions about language. Some of the writing craft, and just obviously, so you guys know, some of you are already my students, some of you are not, although I hope you will consider joining me in the fall in the Path of the Storyteller program. But each one of these, disciplines is potentially the subject of a full exploration, and we have full lessons about all of them in the Path of the Storyteller program. But here's just a kind of a quick rundown of the types of things that you're going to look at when you revise the language. You're going to go word by word, because every word is either doing its job or it's a dead weight. And if it's a dead weight, out it goes. You are going to always prioritize concrete language, specific language over abstract language. You are going to load your writing with specifics, not generics. The reason for this is that is the kind of language that activates what we call the fictional dream in the mind of the reader, and that is the goal of good writing. Full stop. That's the goal of good writing, okay? We don't want any generic details, because a generic detail does not tell story, nor does it establish character. So we strive for details that are concrete, specific, adding new information in every line, and inflected with character and story. All right. There's no generic writing. I've got a bunch of really good books on my desk right next to me, and I could pick any one up and I could read a sentence from any of those books, and you would know right away from which book I was reading. You would not mistake a sentence of Bud Not Buddy for a sentence of Charlotte's Web, for a sentence of Jane Eyre, for a sentence of The Hobbit. You would not. In one, not even a sentence, a half a sentence, you would know exactly what book I'm reading from. The book is inflected with character and story. Compression. What do I mean by compression? Every time you cut a word, an angel gets its wings, my friends. You must compress your writing so that it has no extra parts, no extra words, no extra syllables, no repetition of meaning, and no preambles. There's a great saying about the foolishness of a preamble in writing, and screenwriters know this saying. So screenwriters, you may have heard it before: start late, get out early. You start each scene as late as it can start. You don't start it before, you don't start it an hour before the good stuff happens. You start when the good stuff is happening. That's when you start the scene. That's what start late, get out early means. I have to say that eliminating redundancy is a tremendous fun in revision. It's one of the things I love. And you would be surprised how much redundancy there is in our drafts. We say the same thing 3 different ways. And then we shove in all kinds of extra words. And this is just part of the drafting process. It's not bad. It's just that when we were drafting, that was the thing to do, because we're just in the flow and we're just letting it. And when we're in the revision process, we're like, aha. So compression is another one of our big tasks in revision. And I have one more big task. And this is where you're going to want to put your ear on again. You want to tune up the music. That to me is, in a way, the most pleasurable part of revision. And what do I mean by it? This is where you really want to start to pay attention to the real fine points of the language, the rhythm of the language, whether you're playing nicely with variety in the rhythm of the way the sentences flow on the page, whether you're mixing up short paragraphs and long paragraphs, short sentences and long sentences, whether the rhythm of the language, the tune of the language, if you will, is functioning like the score of a movie, whether the music of the language is actually helping to support and emphasize the emotional state of what's going on in each scene. So this is like delicious refinement. This is where those of us that love language, love writing, really have a great time, because you're really having just a lot of creative play with the language. But I hope that you can see that there is literally no point in doing this until you've done all these other things first. Okay, because there's no point. There's no point in, doing the final polish and applying of the beeswax on the furniture if you haven't gone in and, fixed all the rickety joints. You have to do things in the right order. Okay. One of the things that you can do to help tune up the music is to read it aloud, and that is a wonderful final task that you can do in revision. Your book has to sound good read aloud, and this is not only true of writers of children's books. I have to tell you, reading is an auditory process. The reader's going to experience the language in their heads as if someone's speaking to them, so it needs to sound good. So there's a ton of like individual writing craft topics. When we look at revision, we bring to bear everything we know about story structure and everything we know about writing craft, and we apply all of it. And that is why, as I wind up my comments here, that is why one revision is never enough. It is why we spend as much time revising as we do drafting sometimes, because there is so much to do to take our raw materials and make them into something that is absolutely designed to be pleasing to the reader. Okay. You will find that when you have a lot of writing craft at your disposal, this idea that writers can never be objective about their work, it has a little less truth to it, because you're not concerned about being objective. You're just applying craft. If you know that you have to eliminate redundancy, it's not personal at this point. You're just looking at the words, trying to find out if you said the same thing 3 times, right? You don't need an ear. You don't need an objective ear. You need writing craft. Like, you need a checklist. You need a strong grounding in what to do. There are a lot of specific things to do. If your writing technique is mushy or absent, you're going to be lost revising by ear. You're going to focus on the words, right? You're not going to necessarily be able to see through to the story structure and fix that first, which is what you should be doing. You're going to be very vulnerable to taking an additive approach instead of a subtractive approach, because you're not going to know what else to do. Something's going to seem missing, and so you'll naturally want to add. But so much of revision is about taking away what is not essential. All right. So revising with technique is subtractive. You eliminate redundancies. You compress language at every level. And here's the last thing I want to say. When you've finished writing a draft, think about how much you've learned about your own book. You are now an expert, the only expert, honestly, on this particular fictional world, on these particular characters. You're the expert. You know more about them than anybody else knows. And so when you go back to revise, you now get to revise as an expert. You're not the person who started drafting. Like the hero of your story, you have been changed by the journey of writing this draft. You know so much more now. And so you want to bring this level of expertise back to the beginning and bring the whole book up to that level of familiarity. It should not feel like the beginning of the book was written by a different person than the end of the book, right? And very often in our drafts, that will be what they feel like, because the first chapters were written by somebody that was just figuring it out. Whereas by the time you get to the end, you've got it all. You've been through it all. Okay. So there's a lot to bear in mind when we go back to revise. And we don't have to do it all at once. That's the main thing. It starts to sound like a lot. And I do sometimes wonder if this is why people get a little bit like, writing craft, it's like so much. It's just going to confuse me. It's like, it's not going to confuse you. It's going to empower you. It's going to let you know exactly what you need to do to make your writing terrific. But when you know a lot, you have to do a lot more work. You have the satisfaction of knowing it's going to make a difference. You are not just rearranging the furniture, you're actually improving things. And you must give yourself permission to do the amount of work necessary. And which brings us back to that initial saying, which is, there is no good writing, there is only good rewriting. The difference between something that is really professional level and ready for the reader is not anything like, oh, the person who wrote it is magic. They have talent. They have this, they have that. Everybody brings what they bring to the process, whatever level of training and experience they have. But it's the ones who are willing to do the work to make it good that end up with something good. You could have the most promising first draft in the world, the best premise, right? Like the coolest idea. But if that writer does not take the time to get enough grasp of story structure, writing craft, and then do the multiple revisions, the careful word by word revision, that is the writer's job in order to make it ready for the reader. It's just going to be a messy manuscript in the bottom of a drawer. The writer sitting next to them may not have the same, flashy level of, great ideas and fancy degrees and all the advantages, but they're willing to do the work. The writer next to them is willing to do the work. Who's going to end up with something that's ready for the reader? It's the writer who's willing to do the work. It's fun when you know what you're doing. Revision is actually kind of fun. It does not feel like a fruitless exercise. It does not feel like it doesn't have an end date. You are working toward a goal and you get to see and enjoy the progress, the fruits of your labors. So my wish for you, my writer friends, is that you too will become the kind of writer that loves revision, that looks forward to it, that has like a nice framework, a nice writing craft, a nice process that you can use when it's time to revise your own work, that you don't just rely on your non-existent objectivity or the ear that got you here that's not going to be able to get you there. Okay. So I'm just going to do a quick check. Looks like we've got some wonderful comments here. It is what a nice group today. I see lots of comments about this has been an awakening, different parts of the brain helping with different parts of the process. It's kind of true that way. And I love this comment, Facebook user. Who else is going to watch this video 50 more times? Hey, you can watch it as many times as you like. That's why I'm here for you. All right. Very, very good. Yes, please draft with abandon and then get at all your writing craft and your story structure craft and revise so that the work can be made reader friendly. That's what we want you to do. We want you to share your stories with the world. All right. Thank you so much for being here. This was a really fun thing to talk about with you. As some of you know, those of you who are on my email list, at pathofthestoryteller.com. I send an email every week giving you a little heads up of what I'm going to talk about on Wednesday. And some of you know that what prompted this particular talk is that I myself am just finishing revising my latest manuscript. And so I've very much been in the pleasure of just tweaking, taking that 3-syllable word and changing it out for a 2-syllable word, figuring out like, if I take this word out of the sentence, does the sentence still work? Because if it does, then that word was unnecessary. Why not give an angel its wings? Take it out, cut a word, give an angel its wings. So this is very much derived from my own writing practice. I know that this is how it works, is because this is what I do. All right. And that's true of the Path of the Storyteller program. It's not an academic exercise. It's how writers work. It's how experienced writers work. And I know that you don't really get to sit on the shoulder of your favorite authors and see how they do it. And a big part of what I wanted to create with this program was the opportunity to teach by sharing how it's done, how it's really done. And I'm not saying that every author out there uses this exact same process, but I will say that every well-revised, well-structured book, the kinds of books that, in my opinion, have a strong enough architecture to last, to endure, that writer at some point in the process had a way of of ticking all these things off the writer to-do list. They had their way of doing it, you know. They will, and it will work for you as well. So let me say farewell to you guys today. I will be back next week at 1 p.m. Now, between now and then, please, if you are not on my mailing list, do get on it, because we are going to start inviting students to join up the Path of the Storyteller program in the fall. I'm very much looking forward to meeting a new group of writers and taking them through this very step-by-step training. The first 8 weeks are all about story structure. So by the time you get through the first 8 weeks, you are going to be talking about story structure in a whole different way. It's going to give you a very different way of being able to understand what makes a good story. And then guess what? 7 weeks of pure writing craft. We dive deep into all of these topics: how to choose details, how to compress, how to use dialogue, how to choose the right words, how to fix the tune of the language, all of the things that I talk about in these videos. We go through them step by step with lessons and exercises, and I am there with you every step of the way to answer questions and look at what you're doing. Okay, it's a wonderful program. So I'm really hoping some of you will join me this fall. In the meantime, keep writing, and I will see you next Wednesday.